In 2001, he founded Acton School of Business. In 2010, Jeff and his wife, Laura, launched Acton Academy. Acton, as many of you know, is a K-12 school that blends the one-room schoolhouse with the Socratic method and 21st century technology. Acton has expanded since that time, so there are about 300 Acton campuses worldwide, and Acton's children's business fairs have served about 70,000 young entrepreneurs in over 600 cities in 26 countries, so big reach. Jeff also happens to be a Harvard Business School graduate, and he's served on the governing committees there for over 2 decades. He's also a longtime director of the National Review and the Philanthropy Roundtable. And in 2023, he and his wife, Laura, received the Simon DeVos Prize for Philanthropy. And he wants to note that he and his wife, Laura, are now retired from Acton, so he's just speaking for himself today. And he's out in California, so it's a little early there. So I want to give Jeff a big thanks for being here this morning. So thank you very much, Jeff, for doing that. And do we have Jeff?
I hope so.
Okay. All right. We do have him. Do we have him on the screen? Jeff, we're just queuing you up here. We still don't see you. We can hear you, but we don't see you.
No worries. I am here.
Okay, there he is. All right.
All right. Hello. Think back to when you were 6 years old. The world brimmed with possibilities. You were a natural learner, deeply curious, and maybe even believed you were a superhero. What if you were right? What if children can accomplish far more than we've ever imagined? Google shares information, Uber shares cars, Airbnb shares rooms. In a learner-driven world, ordinary heroes share learning within a community bound by extremely high standards of excellence, becoming convinced they might know that they will find a calling that will change the world. I'd like to invite you to consider a journey, not to utopia, but to a messy, real place balanced between chaos and order. I'll share examples, recipes, maps, and reveal rules, roles, and rewards. Think of them like Legos that you can use to build your own learner-driven or hero-driven world. They can guide you from here today to a better there and tomorrow. Be forewarned, though, to embark on this heroic journey, you'll need to cast aside some old paradigms. And as Thomas Kuhn reminds us, that takes rare courage. The new paradigm that the future of learning is not a school. Our first glimpse at this holy grail begins in 2009 with Sam, age 7, and Charlie, age 9, who founded the Children's Business Fair, or as Charlie described it, a chance for children to sell stuff to adults. The key ingredients: children with a passion, making something with their own hands, selling it safely to a stranger, with the thrill of some extra cash in their pocket when they're finished, or the sting of unsold inventory. The most important outcome: the courage to look an adult in the eye and make the sale. Now, here's a confession. I ignored Charlie and Sam's fair as it doubled in size year after year after year, until it reached 127 booths with 235 entrepreneurs and thousands of visitors, all with no investment or effort on our part. I'm an entrepreneur and a professor of entrepreneurship who completely missed the opportunity right before my eyes to inspire, equip, and connect entrepreneurs. Finally, we put up a website. Today, we've served over 70,000 young entrepreneurs in over 600 cities in 26 countries. Next year, we expect to host 2,000 fairs at a cost of $10 per learner, all managed by one adult at headquarters. Building block number one for the learner-driven world, a real game. 4 parts to a real game. A launch. You have to describe why this matters. Imagine this. You're in the shoes, ... World-class examples, so we know what to build, a process, a recipe, or an algorithm. How do I actually do this? And then the rules and rewards and roles of gamification. How does the game actually work? Now, what's amazing is for $10 a learner, we get more learning than a year of formal education. And it's scalable. Although we'll see later, scalable might actually be the wrong terms. Games are trivial? I think not. Charlie is now 23 years old. He leaves next week to become a U.S. Marine aviator, likely to fly an F-35 fighter jet. He will be trained mostly through games, real-world games that will decide who lives and who dies, and whether the freedoms you live under will be preserved. The headline: children and people in general are heroes capable of far more than we have ever imagined. Example number 2, Acton Academy, founded in 2010 in a small house. Now here's a word of caution. At first, we too thought it was a school until we saw what young heroes can build. You start with building block number 1, a real game. But now, imagine challenges and games strung together in learning arcs, like a narrative arc of a 3-act play or your favorite movie. The hero's journey in each of these steps along the arc as tension builds towards a climax. Each day is an arc. Each week has its arc. Each session has an arc, ending in a real-world exhibition. And then the year has an arc. 7 of these session-long arcs, all under some overarching question, with a week in between to rest. Almost a year-round school. And yet, not a school. All right, so the key building blocks. Number 1, a belief that every person who enters your doors is a hero, a genius, who deserves to find a calling that will change the world. Socratic discussions to launch and close the day and move the arc along, each to hone critical thinking skills. Quest, these in-person, hands-on exhibitions to deliver to visitors the mental models and the recipes they can use in the real world. And apprenticeships, found by learners themselves, starting at age 11. 2 key discoveries. 1, a high IQ may be needed to solve three-body orbital mechanics, but in the real world, grit and kindness matter far more. And second, real learning requires authentic community, like a tribe, a largely in-person, healthy tribe. And that's not a metaphor. It's actually another game where you have to actually build and rebuild the tribe over and over again. Still sound like a school? I left out one very important fact. At our mature campuses, we have up to 144 learners in multi-age studios, 48 in preschool or Spark, 36 of all ages in elementary, 36 in middle school, and 48 in Launchpad, which is what we call our substitute for high school. And here's the important fact: 144 learners and only 1 or 2 adults for everything: janitorial, administration, and learning. For there are no adult teachers on an Acton campus, because everyone is a learner and a servant leader who believes he or she and everyone in the tribe is a genius who will change the world. The total cost, less than $1,000 per learner per year at some campuses, with academic progress across the network 3 times faster than in traditional schools, with no homework. Yet no one cares much about the academics, because once equipped with the right tools, learning becomes self-directed. It's self-management and self-governance that really matter. The outcome, we now have over 300 communities on our way to 1,000 learner-driven communities that will serve 130,000 learners in 26 countries. More importantly, we have 20,000 auditions from parent entrepreneurs who want to launch a campus. The total headquarters staff to run all of this, 2 people. Because with modularity, subsidiarity, positive deviance, meaning sharing what works with each other, and an army of heroes, the need for an institution vanishes. And all, and for a cost as low as $1,000 per learner per year for 100% in-person learning. All right, example number 3, the next great adventure, a GPS for life. Imagine pop-up communities where games build important skills and face-to-face relationships. Heroes embark on self-directed projects or organized quests with Socratic discussions for ages 15 to 50. At the end, participants deliver a TEDx-style talk to a community of mentors, choosing a superpower, an industry, and a next step in life. So far, over 120 prototype talks and over $400,000 in fellowships awarded, including awards to be earned as large as $100,000. Designed to spread to 500 cities, serving 50,000 learners a year, and entirely self-supporting. Notice I said spread and not scale. That's part of the magic. Scaling is an industrial term, usually misapplied. Bureaucracies do not scale. With the right hero stories, games, audition funnels, tribe building tools, and modularity, spreading is more the right word. Like Johnny Appleseed, instead of building prisons. The headline, their learner-driven or hero-driven approach isn't about learning, really. It's about personal transformation and building healthy communities. All right, I'll stop there, Dan, and turn it back to you for questions.
All right, thank you very much, Jeff. Maybe if you don't mind, maybe I'll start with the first question. So it seems that your model, as I understand it, or maybe as an outsider might understand it, is the students might be required to be very independent learners. So do you see this model as being potentially for every kid, or is this for a particular kind of kid with a particular posture towards education?
Well, one of the riddle of Acton is we only accept geniuses, but it's open to every person who auditions. And it's a riddle, of course, because how is that possible? And the answer is because we do think that each child is a genius. And I don't mean 180 IQ, obviously, that's not true. But what I do mean is each person has a special gift. And so the only thing we're actually checking for in auditions, and I say audition because it's up to the person who wants to belong, is do you want to be here? Because, you leave the ordinary world, the kind of boring ordinary world for a hero's journey, and you take off on an adventure. So anyone who wants to come can come on the adventure. We don't see across socioeconomics boundaries, across cultural boundaries, across countries. We get children of all types, of all IQs. I will say that once you get past about age 13 or so, it does appear that it's harder to build conscientiousness. People tend to kind of be as conscientious as they're going to be, but they can join a group like the Marines that has a strong culture, and their conscientiousness will rise. It just will go back down if they leave the group. So this whole thing about the tribe is really important, and we can accept anyone as long as the tribe is healthy enough to take someone who needs a lot of work. So the answer is, it seems to work for anyone who wants to try.
Okay, we're going to open up the floor to questions. Yes. I think we got a mic coming around. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm fascinated by the financials that you shared because I run a program for 50 students. Our tuition's $35,000 a year, and we staff to a 3-to-1 ratio. So I don't understand how the math is mathing with what you're doing.
Well, look, it's pretty easy. There are no adults, and adults are the cost. So quite literally, I'm not kidding when I say we got campuses with 130, 140 learners and 1 or 2 full-time adults. Now, that's a little deceiving because by the time you get there, you probably have 30 or 40 plus launch padders or high school age that are more competent than any adults you could hire. But the short answer is almost all the cost in learning is paying an adult to do something, and we don't have that.
How are you
So.
liability and behavior management?
Oh,
So-
I'm sorry, I can't. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just clarify. She said, how are you dealing with liability, and what do you do about behavioral management?
Well, we don't manage behavior. They self-govern. Now, look, it's not a utopia. It's messy. That's the point. They're always continuing building and rebuilding. They do go between chaos and order. We might lose 3 weeks of learning because the entire society collapses and has to be rebuilt by them. And it turns out, though, when you look back, that's when the most important learning occurs. So there's no behavioral management. There is lots of them self-governing, and it is a messy process. But so liability, our campuses are entirely transparent. There's video sharing going on all the time in the studios, between studios. There's people, they're learners walking between studios all the time. So it's very much like a community. There'll be preschoolers up in the launchpad area or middle schoolers down in the elementary studio. So it's like a large interacting community all the time.
Thank you. So my name is Nicolene Peck. I should turn back here so I can see you. Anyway, and I actually head a parenting company called Teaching Self-Government. So of course I'm very intrigued by the concept of bringing that self-government into the classroom, which is something that I've been trying to help people do for many, many years. And so I love seeing this example, but also as a homeschool mother, we did something back in the day. Oliver DeMille made a book called A Thomas Jefferson Education, and it was all about leadership education and how the burden was put on the child for the education. And that was a really cool thing for my children to know my education is up to me. And so what I'm seeing here is this large group of children that are all together going, my education is up to me. Now, I know that as a parent, I had to have regular conversations with my children where I would say, okay, so here are the phases of learning. There's these different phases you're going to go through, and this is what happens during these phases of learning. What phase do you think you're at this year or right now, and then 6 months later we'd have that conversation again and then again to see where they were moving through those phases of learning so that they could mark themselves and make plans for themselves and goals. And I'm wondering if at these Acton Academies, if you have deliberate conversations like that with the children at all, or is it a little bit more of an unschooling type of approach, if you're familiar with what unschooling is?
Well, it's a very thoughtful question. Unschooling Rules author Clark Aldridge and I are working actually on, it's going to be his book, but a book on this right now. Oliver DeMille is a good friend, and we borrowed from Oliver as well as a lot of other people. Most of this was borrowed like Legos and put back together, not recreated. So to answer your question, the learners have all sorts of tools to experiment with in Quest. They also do, if they stay with us from late preschool all the way through Launchpad, they'll do over 7,000 Socratic discussions, led mostly by them, and created. So there's the kind of sharing and learning you're talking about is exactly what happens. It just happens learner to learner. I mean, they have to learn how to do it. And this is where, we're using recipes, we're using algorithms, we're using examples. That game slide I gave you is really important because everything feels like a game, and it doesn't even feel like you're having discussions. It feels like you're in a journey with a group of people, and every day there's a journey. It begins and ends every week. There's a climax on a Thursday, and there's a Friday reflection. Every session feels like that. So it feels like you're in more of a playing in your neighborhood, like the old neighborhoods where kids would play till the street lights dimmed. Feels like a county fair where you can play games of skills and chance and go on the midway and see new worlds, or maybe go to the exhibition and win a blue ribbon for your prize hog. So it feels like the real world to them, not like education at all. It feels like the real world.
Jeff, you mentioned that your students achieve about 3 times what's expected for academic growth in a given year. How do you track academic growth?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, we're not fans of standardized tests. We could spend a lot of time talking about those. We do, however, we used to take the Stanford 10 test, and now it's mainly the Iowa test. So once a year, we have to beg learners and parents to take the test. And based on that test, we see the same pattern over and over again, that learners will gain 2 to 3 grade levels a year. Now, what's interesting is pretty quickly, nobody even cares about that. That becomes trivial because there's so much learning going on in other ways: how to speak, how to talk, how to sell, how to get along with others, how to apologize. I mean, there's so many other more important recipes and algorithms and being learned, mental models being learned, that yes, they get the kind of normally standard measured education, which, by the way, seems to be completely independent of IQ. It's not independent of time on task. I mean, so they may have to spend a little more time if you're not as good at math or something. But we'll have learners go through, we've had learners go through all of Khan Academy math, all 1,200 problems in as little as 14 months, from 1 + 1 = 2 through calculus. Others take a lot more time, but they still, if Sal would stop adding problems, he would make our lives a little easier. He's adding more problem sets. But anyway, they learn lots of what you would consider reading, writing, math. It just turns out to be not that important given the other things they're learning.
Yeah. Right over here.
Thanks, Jeff. Wondering is Acton the next iteration of, say, Summerhill or Sudbury Valley, or the things of the 60s and 70s with open and free schools? And if you feel like it's the next iteration, what do you think will make it stickier this time around? Because that was a trend, and then those schools still exist, but it's not as popular as much nowadays. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, great question. And we've borrowed from we've borrowed from Sudbury. We're really not like a democratic school because there's lots and lots of systems. It feels more like Google than it does like a Sudbury, although we borrowed from those groups. Here's the thing. I think this is the first group of educators I've ever spoken to, because I left Acton, we were too busy doing things. We're not interested in building schools at all. We're not the answer to everything. So we're just serving parents that show up and want to be served. There are going to be a lot of different models. We don't care if it's trendy. I don't think you can do what we do in a traditional school. I don't think it'll work at all. So I'm not trying to convince people to use it. I do think the learner-driven approach will work really well in corporations and not-for-profits. And that's kind of the direction we're heading, because on the learning side of younger people, you know, we're kind of started well enough, but we're not trying to be the answer to everything. Things come and go, and I believe we probably got this model maybe 20% finished. I mean, I think we're just at the very start of understanding how the model's going to work. But I think it's a model for learning in the 21st century. I don't think it's really has much to do with schools at all. It's not a school. They're not, the parents may, when they first come, think it's a school, but when you see how they really run, it's much more like a community building tool than it is a school.
Yes.
I know that sounds weird. You have to see it you have to see it to understand it, but it's, and it's messy, again, messy and chaotic.
Hi, my name is Carrie Ann Lisenby, and I'm from Utah. I'm a legislator. And hi. Actually, my grandson is in the Acton Academy in Logan, Utah. So, and this this seems very much like my homeschool when I raised my 6 kids. And I've heard the DeMille strategies, the Sudbury schools. I've heard all of that as I've listened to you. But I think I'm really curious about, for lack of a better term, what the classroom environment looks like. If you could kind of get into the weeds on what that looks like for the kids. You mentioned Khan Academy, which is obviously on the internet, but what are the items in the classroom? What's the environment? How enriched is it? That's my question.
And what do you mean by enriched? Just to make sure I understand the question.
What are the tactile things that, yes, the resources, the things that the young people, the heroes, are interacting with on a day-to-day that provide opportunities for information?
So that varies by studio, because if you're in the Spark or preschool, it would look and feel much more like Montessori. I mean, we've built and borrowed from lots of people, including Sal Khan in the 21st century, Maria Montessori earlier, but Montessori is probably what we would be closest to. So if you went into a preschool, it would look like Montessori with more free play and lots of tactile things to do. As you get in the elementary and middle school and Launchpad studios, it increasingly looks like either a makerspace or more like Google. And we always say it's really boring to watch an Acton studio because there's lots of people running around doing lots of things and meeting in teams and breaking up, but they're busy. And so they're busy doing things. There'll be everyone will gather at 8:30 for 15 minutes Socratic launch. They'll gather again at 12:30 for the afternoon launch. They'll gather at 3 o'clock for a closing. So there are things that happen that are synchronous during the day. There's times, and now the learners make up these schedules. They can adapt them and change them, but there's times when there's silent core skills work, just like you would close your office door, but to work at Google. But you might also walk outside with a group of learners to work on something even during silent core skills time. So again, imagine these as Legos that they're moving around and experimenting with to see what works. And it's just a series of experiments with frameworks and with tools to see what works for what they're trying to get done. The quests, by the way, even starting at the elementary level, are very sophisticated. It's a terrible word, but they're actually doing real medical diagnoses. They're actually, using chemistry to cook elaborate meals. These are, you'd be stunned what, elementary students can learn about thermodynamics in a hands-on way. I learned a lot more watching them learn thermodynamics than I did as an engineer, taking thermodynamics courses. So the amount of learning is just staggering, but if you watched it, it just looks like a group of people busy doing something they're engulfed in. And one of the biggest problems is, the learners don't want to go home for the week break, and they don't want to go on family vacations because they can come and go as they want. but they're too busy to do that. They've got an exhibition or something to do, and they want to get back up to the campus and get back to work, because work's fun. It's a game. It's really hard, and it's really fun.
Okay, I think we got time for one more question, and then we'll let Jeff close things up. How about right way in the back there?
Right, good. Okay, this one's working. I'm curious about your international Acton Academies and what types of policies that you're meeting in these different countries in order to open an academy there. I saw one, I think, on the map in Singapore and India, and maybe give us a little bit more insight into what you're doing.
Well, the one you likely saw is more likely Malaysia. You know, we go where the ground is fertile. It really is like spreading seeds. And so there are some countries we have a lot harder time operating in. Now, remember, these are all run by parent entrepreneurs. So they have to go figure out the regulatory environment. And the first Acton in a different country has sometimes a high burden to do that. So we go where the laws allow us to operate. Harder in Singapore, harder in Europe, easier in Central and South America. So the answer is people, the owners just have to figure it out. And you know, same thing with U.S. states. We're in, I think, 43 states, maybe 44, but it's harder in some than in others. And you know, it's different in every one. In Texas, I think you can teach witchcraft in a private school and it's okay. In other places, a little harder.
Okay, we've got one more, Jeff. We got one more question. Yes.
Okay.
Hello, Mr. Sandefer. My name is John Ford. I'm a freshman at Boston College right now. And you know, after hearing that presentation, I kind of wish that I knew about Acton Academy when I was younger. But I'm wondering how we can plan to move schools away from this traditional model to like adapting more of this like self-discovery philosophy for students.
Man, that's a great question. And, you know, it's really why Clark Aldridge and I, and Clark's an expert in SIMS, and he was on the committee that tried to improve the SAT. That's why Clark's working on this book, John, because we're going to try to come up with a set of tools that we can offer. And here's the hard thing. We're probably going to offer it to anybody except schools. But just because we don't want to compete with Acton Academy, and we don't want people saying they're doing this when they're not for real, but we're going to try to come up with a set of skills. And what I showed you for the next great adventure, you know, is where we're trying this in the wild. So I just say when those tools come out, or read Laura's book, Courage to Grow, really has everything in it. My wife's book about how to do this. It's just really hard to do in an institution. And you'll see why I've got a 2-minute close. But I think I'll explain why in that close it's hard to do in institutions.
Yeah. So, Jeff, why don't we go ahead and wrap here? So I'll turn the floor back over to you.
Great. Just a couple of minutes to close. You know, at Acton, we believe that stories and fables and myths are centuries of civilization and human nature boiled down to their essence. So I'm going to end with a fable and a call. In 1837, Hans Christian Andersen wrote about the emperor who was sold invisible finery at an expensive price, a defrauding, you might say. His loyal subjects were too frightened to say anything except for a brave child. Here's somewhat dated information, but it still shows all you need to know. The blue line on top is total cost per capita for education in the United States. The line in the middle, the gold line, is number of employees. And the lines at the bottom are enrollment and test scores. Like a learner-driven world, it's hard to forget this chart once you see it. And nowhere on this chart is measured the destruction of human potential that I've seen inflicted by schools, and for our 3 children, by universities as well. In a learner-driven world, learning and education are not the same. The first you do to someone, the second is freely chosen. And the reason for learning is to get from here today to a better there tomorrow for the hero, and more importantly, to become who you were meant to be self-managing and self-governing with a calling. Now you might ask, why does all this matter? Well, in 1835, Tocqueville wrote of America's voluntary associations with shared beliefs, overlapping memberships, and true community, just like learner-driven tribes. A century or so later, Rene Girard wrote of the opposite, the tendency of societies, ancient and modern, towards mimetics, desiring things, then breaking into factions, then eventually a war of all against all, which may sound familiar. Each of us is either spreading the seeds of civilization or the seeds of destruction. That is the choice. So 5 takeaways for today. Number 1, the future of learning is not a school. As John asked, I think don't kid yourself, I don't think this will work inside an educational institution that's bent on protecting itself. Number 2, children and people in general can accomplish far more than you've ever imagined. Number 3, real learning helps me get from here today to a there tomorrow that matters. Number 4, while the grail or the goal in serving others does matter, it's how the hero changes that matters most. True learning and transformation must be chosen, not coerced. Scaling a bureaucracy may produce widgets to serve society. However, my children and yours and those we serve are precious beings, not widgets. And I will not have my children or grandchildren treated that way. Not on my watch, anyway. I'll add one final lesson, returning to the naked king. Those who defrauded him, and a brave child like you when you were 6 years old. It's the reason we named our experiments after Lord Acton, who famously said, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. When institutions become corrupt, led by those who are corrupt or simply fools, it's time to start a revolution. To end where we started, the future of learning is not a school. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, our next session starts at 9:15. Do we want to make that switch, Paul? Just maybe. Do you want to make? I don't think so. Yeah. Okay. So next session at 9:15.
I think it'll get so confusing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right.
And I think we'll be okay.
The overflow room looks like it's quite a few people in there, but there were a lot of empty spaces over there.